Pete, Iron Man, and Andreas Creighton. Take one.
Hi, Andreas. So I had to make the decision recently. We needed authentication. And do we build the authentication ourselves, or do we choose something like Auth0? What is your default approach to something like that?
So your question is like, do you go with a managed service or do you build something yourself?
Basically, yes.
I think that's a good question, Peter, because we see lots of people struggle with that decision. By default, I would say to always go with a service provider because basically it takes development time away. And also, of course, you need to maintain less code because it's outsourced. But that comes with quite some risks as well because the service provider, first of all, if they are out, for example, and it's your authentication, no one can log in anymore. But also it comes with a cost. So the tactics of those providers are typically that it's free or very cheap in the beginning. When things start growing, it becomes very hard or the price becomes a lot more expensive. And the third thing, I think, which is the most important one, especially, for example, with something like authentication, is a lock-in that they create. Yeah. So you really need to assess if you want to move out of them, how easy is it? So, for example, if you implement authentication with Auth0 and people on Auth0 use the Google authentication to log in on Auth0, can you take over the Google tokens? And the answer is no. So basically, if you're moving away from Auth0 to do your own authentication, then you either need to already provide the authentication API keys on the Auth0 side, or all your users have to re-authenticate, which is a risk, and it's a risk that you can say, okay, we can live with it because it allows us to go faster. And so I think in an early stage startup, you should always go and take that risk, because basically it allows you to focus on the core of what you want to develop. But the later stage you get, the more advanced, I guess, the use will be. And there, I think you need to make the decision, like, if you want to build this and maintain it, very important, not only build, but also maintain it ourselves. Is it worth the cost of doing it ourselves versus doing it with provider?
Focusing on your core in the beginning sounds really good. And I think it's also keeping in mind that you're making that deliberate choice right now, but in the future you want to get rid of that choice. So I think it's very good to prepare for that when you start building something like that. Yeah,
I think by default you should always go with the managed service, and then when it becomes too expensive or too slow for your needs, then basically you can internalize it, because then it's justified because it becomes so expensive that it's justified to build it internally. One of the things I see recently is that people actually go too much for managed services for like very stupid things. So you have to be very careful in balancing that out. Like with every service provider you go with, make sure that it's really something, for example, that's not already doable also via an open source plugin or in the application or whatever you're using.
The first reaction should be, does the framework we use provide it for us instead of paying
or is there
for
an
something?
Easy way to implement it on the code level? For example, for Auth0, there is, I think it's called passport.js, for example, which is like an open source thing doing exactly the same. But then, of course, you need to maintain the infrastructure and everything.
That makes a lot of sense, actually.